let's get this show on the road. Good afternoon, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir?
Not bad, John. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. It's a Friday afternoon, even though I know that always drives you nuts with the time shift and stuff like that. Officially, this is a Thursday morning. This will be Thursday morning, June 20... I can't do math. 29th when this goes
29th.
out. There you go. I can't count.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's good. It's, I'm still here. I had a bad sub joke I'm not going to make. But no, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Not bad. We're finally getting, it's like today's going to be a good day and we've knocked off all the storms. So, hopefully back to summertime since it is now the end of June. It's June 29th, which means technically we are now like 6 weeks out of Mobility Field Day 9.
That is true. It feels like it was just yesterday. But it wasn't. Time does fly. I feel like it flies when I get older, but
why does it feel like it was just yesterday for you? You didn't have it.
I didn't even do with it.
Watched.
It just flew. I didn't even watch. No, it just feels like we were talking about it just yesterday. I mean, it was probably a couple episodes ago at this point, but there's a segue there. I think that you're just leaving out there, and I'm going to let you take that one.
Fine, I'll clean up my mess. All right. So the reason why I brought up Mobility Field Day 9 is so we had a few episodes ago, we had Rajiv on, and he was talking about Cloud RRM. Well, Cloud RRM was not the only thing that we announced at Mobility Field Day 9. In addition to the AP that I announced that I then had to quickly rescind, we also brought up another product that is fairly new, and that one was called the RWG. And so I thought to continue our, hey, let's talk to people that were at Mobility Field Day and do a little bit more of a conversation about it, that I would bring on the guy who did that presentation. And his name is John Murphy. So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. John Murphy here. It's going to be fun with two Johns, but I'm the one that's a principal systems engineer. And
he's the smart guy.
I don't know about that. Basically I bring the specifications from the customers to the engineers. I'm a people person. You could say that. But basically I work with our product managers and our customers and partners. And I'm an overlay resource. So, people tend to bring, more complex things to me, and I get involved in new features and stuff like that. So it's fun.
So I got a problem with that, because if you're the one that brings the requirements from the customers to the engineers, I no longer have a job. So now I got hopefully my boss. So, all right. So we had 2 weeks ago, we had my boss on. So he's probably not listening to this one because he doesn't care anymore. He already got his shot of fame and glory. And so hopefully he's not listening as I try to go, hey, I got to figure out what do I do now that John Murphy, not John Deegan, John Murphy has stolen my job. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries, Jim. There sometimes can be a pretty big gap between how customers see the world and how engineers see the world. So I think there's room for both of us there.
You say that even though we've met, which I appreciate. So,
oh, well, all right. Now that we've got kind of just given Jim a heart attack because he's got no more job here, try to walk him off a ledge on this Thursday morning. Anyway,
it's not Thursday.
I just told you it was Thursday morning. You just told me it was. So
wait, what?
See? Gotcha.
Right. I can drink at 8 a.m., right?
Yeah, sure. If only it was, it's 8 a.m. somewhere. Anyways, this went off the rails really fast. We didn't even get into the question.
Oh my, this has got to be a record.
So let's talk. That's just what happens when you have two Johns. I wonder if it would be the same if we had two Jims. Food for thought. We'll have to try
there can only be one Jim. That's not a concern.
There's a whole story behind that. We won't go into that. But anyway.
So let's ask Mr. Murphy some questions about RWG so we can educate our audience.
And us.
Well, I was going to say he's the smart guy. That's why we have him on. So you want me to kick this one off, Mr. Palmer, or do you want me to?
Yeah. why don't you go for it
Ooh,
since
goody.
I guess technically you and him are similar
Well,
because
similar because we both share a name. That's about it. He's
oh,
smart. I'm
okay.
just
All
I'm
right.
just an SE.
Okay.
But so all right, we'll start off. We got the nice questions queued up, Jim. Thank you for making me look smarter. So right off the bat, we've got Wi-Fi and networking. We've got a ton of acronyms and alphabet soup. As if they didn't have enough already, we have to introduce another one. So give us like the elevator pitch, if you will. What is RWG?
Yeah, so officially RWG stands for the Ruckus WAN Gateway. And basically, the concept here is we're known for Wi-Fi and switching, along with the software that manages that and provides analytics. But every network, well, not every network, but primarily most networks connect to the internet because that's where most of the stuff you want to access is, right? So every network needs some kind of device to make that connection. And that does things like routing and NAT. And, there can be some security functions there as well. And that's kind of what Ruckus WAN Gateway is, or RWG. But RWG, if you wanted to be creative, you could make it stand for other stuff too, if you prefer. I mean, you could call it the Remote Worker Gateway because there's VPN functionality in there. You could call it the Real-Time Workload Gateway because it's got a hypervisor and you can run workloads and service chain them. You could call it the Repeatable WAN Gateway because it's all templatable based off of YAML, and we have a thing called Pack Manager, which you can use to push out configurations across hundreds of these things if you want to have repeatable config at all your sites. So it would totally blow out the time you have for the podcast to go into all the features, which is why it's not the right place to do that. But basically, it's the gateway that you place at the edge of your network to connect it to the internet.
And I was watching your presentation at Mobility Field Day 9 again. I was actually in the room at the back of the room when you gave it. And I was watching it again this morning just to try to remind myself what happened because I've slept since then. And I got to the one slide where you ended up you popped up like all the different like features that were contained within the Ruckus WAN Gateway. And I have to say, I think even just reading off all of those would probably take up like half of our time just to read it off. So it really kind of, I guess brought me back into what the possibilities really are just based on how many things were listed on that one slide. So it was sort of impressive at all the different things. And I commend you for coming up with all kinds of different things to call them or to use RWG on. But let's go into I'm going to bring up another buzzword or another initialism of SD-WAN. And you were talking about like the remote worker gateway and stuff like that. Is that concept, remote worker gateway, is that similar to what people would talk about with SD-WAN, or are we talking about, is it something different? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. There's some overlap in kind of those technologies, right? So SD-WAN, stands for Software Defined Wide Area Network, and basically what it is if you think back, we had this concept of SDN or Software Defined Networking, which was kind of abstracting the control plane from the data plane and having the ability to have like a centralized controller that could configure the data path for your network, right? So if we apply that idea of software defined networking to the WAN, then it looks like having some kind of policy where you can control how your traffic routes without having to rely on any specific physical transport mechanism. So you might have leased lines, MPLS connections, LTE, whatever it might be, commodity internet connections, cable modems. So the ability to steer traffic for applications, where it needs to go based on which path makes the right sense for that application is kind of the fundamental idea behind SD-WAN. And typically how you see this implemented is usually it's an overlay of VPN tunnels that then traffic can be steered into. So you can take any internet connection that may not be trusted. Like you may trust your service provider to deliver your traffic over a leased line without looking at it. If it's not encrypted, they certainly could, but there's some trust there because of that business relationship. But with SD-WAN, what you're typically going to do is build these VPN tunnels, and that allows you to use, a variety of different WAN connections at the site, whatever makes sense. And oftentimes you'll have WAN connections that have different characteristics. So you might have like a very high speed connection, but maybe the latency is not quite as good on that one. And then you might have a lower speed connection with better latency or better jitter. And You have certain types of traffic, like voice traffic, where the latency is very important. There's not a lot of bandwidth there. So it might make sense to push your voice traffic over that low latency, low jitter connection that may not have as much bandwidth, and push all your other traffic the other way. That's just one example. But of course, you always want to have redundancy as well. So we give you the ability to fail that traffic over to an available link should that link that you selected go down. I mean, I think that's basically the idea behind SD-WAN.
So when you talk about like switching over the link because it goes down, I mean, that sounds almost like a load balancer, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's some similarity in how those things work for sure. I mean, we can in fact load balance traffic across multiple links. So, for certain types of traffic, you might not really care which link it takes, right? We just want to push the traffic out. And so one of the options we have with RWG is to just load balance across all links.
And I know there's a lot of times people will do a load balance, across all links, but then, the load failover traditionally would fall under sort of like, hey, if you want to do an automatic failover of one, WAN link to a different one because one goes down thanks to a backhoe chopping fiber, 15 miles away, which is a true story. So yeah, that's fun when you're like, what happened to my link? And then you come to find out that, there was a backhoe 15 miles away that chopped your fiber. But so traditionally that would be in a load balancer. People would tell you, you need that load balancer to do that failover. And so the Ruckus WAN gateway has that ability to where you can program it, I'm guessing, to where you
it does. And, you mentioned that big list of features that RWG has, and, it's great that we have all that stuff, but really the magic is how all those features are bound together with the policy inside RWG. So in that same policy where you're determining things like, how that traffic is going to behave and how it's going to be queued, how much bandwidth it's going to have, ACLs or security scans or all, whatever it is you want to do with that traffic. Now you have this additional ability to decide which uplink you want that traffic to go through, as well as what the backup is should that uplink fail. So, it's the ability to steer that traffic and provide a failover, but to do it in a way that it's integrated with all of the other decisions you're making about that traffic. And that's really kind of the fundamental advantage of having all those features in this one platform, which is RWG.
Nice. So it's doing everything, right? It slices, it dices, it blends, it purees, does all the good stuff. So
but wait, John.
But that's not all.
Sorry, I had to get my Billy Mays out.
I was waiting for somebody. So I've got to ask, right? So RWG appears to do everything under the sun, right? So, I mean, do we still need Smart Zone, or if you're a Ruckus One customer, do you still need that, or is this a complementary thing? Like, how does this fit in our stack, if you will?
Yeah, so it is complementary, right? You're still going to need Smart Zone or Ruckus One, or even in some cases Unleashed. All three of those are valid options. So the RWG is going to give you an additional overlay of automation on top of whatever that management platform is that you've chosen, right? So you still need the Smart Zone or Ruckus One to control translating your configuration of what you want your wireless network to be, or your wired network, into the low-level commands that the AP needs to understand, right? So that's the job of Smart Zone or Ruckus One is to have all your detailed configuration centralized, and then it pushes that out to all the APs and manages all those client sessions, et cetera. So yeah, you definitely need both. But when you add RWG, what it gives you is the ability to then have this automation platform that sits on top. And you could have, one or more Smart Zones. You could also have that Ruckus One connection. You could have Unleashed networks. You could even have third-party equipment, and then all that can be managed centrally. And so when I create a wireless LAN, if I want to, I can create that directly within the RWG as an element, as a configuration element, and then that can be instantiated into that Smart Zone or into that Unleashed network, or whatever the other third-party network is. And that could be all simultaneously because I might have multiple of those connected.
Nice.
You used a really big word, and so now I know you're like too good for this for John and I.
He's classing up the joint.
He is classing.
Let me know what it was, and I promise not to do it again.
I was about to say some 4-letter word anyway.
It's a family show, Jim.
Wow. I know, a family show. I don't even remember what the word was. It was so big. That was like a three syllable word. Holy crap.
That.
All right, no crap. We won't get into the debate of crap.
I'm not familiar with that acronym, guys. Can you please decode that for me?
I don't know. You're the one who comes up with all that stuff. Not
that's
me.
marketing's job.
I will.
Computational resource analysis protocol.
Damn, that's pretty good. He wants to throw something at me right now.
Let me stretch here. I got to reach. Got to get a baseball to reach to New York. So we're talking about you were talking about Unleashed, which I thought was kind of interesting because I didn't realize that there was still, I mean, there was that hook at that level, I guess. Because when I think of an Unleashed network, I'm not thinking about, somebody that's running, a couple of hundred APs or 1,000 APs because, well, Unleashed can't. And so it's interesting to me that it's like, oh yeah, we can use it on an Unleashed network, because I didn't think that was possible. But that's a nice little thing to learn. But from the larger size, I mean, what are we talking about? Like, hey, we can only handle 1,000 APs or 1,500. Is there a top end?
Yeah. So in terms of the number of APs, it's really going to be dictated by the controller platform that you connect, right? So we have those platforms in Smart Zone that can manage up to 30,000 APs in a single cluster, right? So that's a lot. And of course, when you go to a cloud model, then everything just scales horizontally, and we can spin up resources on demand, and those limits kind of go away. There could be some fundamental limit. We haven't found it yet, right? But then you have to think about the resources RWG itself needs. And that's going to depend on the configuration that you have. So, the more analysis and scanning that you're doing of that traffic, that's going to factor in. But we have resourcing tools that we can help you, decide that and plan what kind of hardware you need to run your RWG. Because keep in mind, RWG is delivered as software. So it can either be run as a virtual machine, or you can install it bare metal. And once you scale up to the biggest bare metal server that you can throw an RWG on, then you're not out of headroom, because you can cluster, and we can actually cluster quite massively with RWG. And there's even just discussing the different clustering topologies would be too much time here, but you can certainly have many dozens of nodes in a single cluster, and we can load balance all of that traffic and provide redundancy and failover, etc. So if there's a limit there, we haven't found it so far, but you do have to look at what the number of users that you're going to have on that network, and then calculate the right hardware resources and kind of plan out the topology of how you're going to build that cluster.
Okay, so when you do, all right, so I got a question though. So earlier on, you were talking about a pack manager to manage multiple ones, but when you cluster, do you get does each server within the cluster, does it have its own management interface, or do you have to use pack manager, or is it something like, hey, when I cluster VSEs together, or even smart zones together, you still only end up with that, you really have that one central management. When you cluster an RWG, is it I need to have one screen open for each one, or how would you manage a cluster of RWGs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. So the cluster is managed in a single interface. So each RWG will have its own IP addressing, but you can go to different nodes to manage. Everything gets stored into a database, and that database is replicated. So you're going to want to replicate that. Typically you're going to want to have some kind of HA, right? So the simplest form, 2 nodes, you'd have a database that can replicate across both. As you get into a bigger cluster, it can make sense to have a few nodes that manage the database, and then you may have nodes that are just more or less data plane forwarders, and the hardware requirements can be different for those use cases, because it's different sorts of things that the hardware has to do for managing all the database access versus just pushing packets through. So it can get pretty complex, at very large scale. But even at the largest scale, you're still just working with like a single web interface, and you'll see everything in that single web interface. Now,
Okay.
now that's for a cluster, right? And once you get beyond a single cluster, which typically is going to mean multiple sites, then that's where the pack manager comes in.
Okay. But in this, so would you put, say you're an enterprise? Sorry, Deegan, I'm hijacking our conversation here.
That's fine.
If you are an organization that has like one central corporate office building, right? And you have multiple offices like throughout the country. Would you have the RWG, would you have just one at your corporate, or help me understand, because I'm having a hard time putting this together in my head. I mean,
yeah, Jim. So there's different topologies you can deploy with. The most common way that you would deploy an RWG is to put it on site close to the users. Okay. And then your example of like a headquarters with branch offices, that's actually a really good example of how you would leverage the SD-WAN we talked about earlier. So in that case, you might have a cluster of RWGs at your main headquarters, and then one or two at each branch. And you could use the pack manager to push out that SD-WAN policy across all of those RWGs and build that mesh of VPN tunnels, as well as push the configurations for all the branch offices out to all the individual RWGs. So typically you're going to want to have a fairly standardized configuration, and you're going to want to have centralized control of that. That's something that, many businesses, really want to achieve. In fact, we're talking to some hospitality brands where they're looking at that ability to have the brand control, what the experience is at the individual hotels. So something like a pack manager where you can define all that policy centrally and then cookie cutter it out, it makes it really easy to maintain, like a golden configuration, you can call it, at all your sites.
Yeah, because one of the things that used to drive me nuts is when you'd be like, oh, well, all of our satellite offices or our branch offices, they all are sort of configured like this, but then you go, oh, but this one over here in Minnesota has its own little special configuration. And oh yeah, by the way, and the one in Oregon has its own little different one. And you're just like, and you get to that point where it's like, not only do I have to troubleshoot the problem, but now I have to figure out, well, what's that unique configuration? So I like the fact that, you can end up with that sort of gold standard. So you're not worried about, like, oh, well, is each branch office configured differently because of some, because it was configured at different times type of thing. So that's nice. I like that.
Yeah. And the other aspect to that that's really nice is, let's say it's time to turn up a new branch, right? So I need the RWG is going to be my gateway, and I've got, ICX switches, and I've got Ruckus APs, etc. What's really cool about the RWG is I can template that all out. So if I have pack manager, I can push all that config out. I can just get someone to get the thing online to the point where it can talk to the pack manager, and then I can push out the config. Or I could even just ship like boxes, unopened boxes of switches and APs, and the server with RWG on it, or it may not even have to have RWG on it. It could be a server like straight from Dell, and I can send someone out there who doesn't know what a MAC address or a VLAN is, have them plug a USB stick into that RWG, and that USB stick, when it boots, can install the software and all of the templated configuration that you've built for it. And by the way, that templated configuration can also include Smart Zone and ICX configuration, so that can go out and connect to all of the switches and the Smart Zone, and basically zero touch, right? So we talk about zero touch, but it's not always exactly zero touch. So we've gotten as close to that, as we can. You got to plug a USB stick in, right, and plug the power cable in, and of course you have to plug the Ethernet cables together. But as far as the config goes, it can all be done up front.
Yeah, zero touch was something that I was messaging with Deegan about here while you were talking in earlier, and I was like, oh, do we go to zero touch? Do we not go to zero touch? There's so, and luckily you did it late enough in the episode that we can say we don't have time to go into zero touch. So we get to claim we talked about it without actually having to talk about it. So thank you.
Nice. Well, I do have one more question that has nothing to do with zero touch. And actually, it's funny because I know, Jim, this came up with Mobility Field Day. It was mentioned on the presentation. And it also came up again for me. I actually did my whatever quarter we're in SE training, and it came up again. And I think as soon as it came up, I pinged Palmer. So you mentioned DPSK mangling, which I hear that and it makes me kind of scared because I feel like somebody's ripping a DPSK to shreds and it's just like all sorts of frightening. And I'm imagining a cute and fluffy DPSK. And yeah, we went off the deep end on this one. And so it's not a bad thing from what I understand with training, even though it sounds kind of scary. So can you walk us through that and, help me understand it, help the audience kind of understand what DPSK mangling is and why it matters to us?
Absolutely, John. And, and it's quite possible that marketing did not approve that terminology, but here's what it is, right? DPSK mangling, basically, this ties into, there's two kind of key features that this ties into. So one is DPSK, like you mentioned. So we have this DPSK functionality where we can use an external device as the source of truth for DPSKs. In this case, that's RWG. And then the other piece is a property management system integration that's in RWG. So if you think about a hotel, they all use these property management systems. When you check in, all your information goes into this database and it knows, John Smith checked into room 205 and he's here for this duration of time and then he's going to leave, right? So since we already know that information, what we can do with RWG is we integrate with the PMS and then RWG has that information too. So it knows John Smith is in that room. And typically the way you would connect to hotel wireless would be with a captive portal, which I know you guys love. I love them quite dearly myself. And you would put in your last name and your room number. And that works, but then, you're connected to the Wi-Fi, but, it's not an encrypted connection. And you had to use a captive portal. So you've lost a little bit of your soul in the process. So instead of that, what we can do is just let you connect directly to a pre-shared key network, right? So you're just putting in the password. Now, what is that password? It's your last name and the room number. We know that because of the PMS integration. So instead of having to use the captive portal, I can just go connect to like a real pre-shared key encrypted network, put in my last name, my room number as the password, and I get on. And then we know who you are. And if you wanted to have, premier level access and we want to charge you for that, we could. And RWG can store all that configuration for what that should cost and post that back to your folio. Right. So when you go to check out, the charge is there. But typically we like to give away Wi-Fi for free because, every guest wants that. So it's a great concept. It got implemented, but then what happens when, sometimes the guest may not quite understand. Was I supposed to type my last name first and then my room number? What if I do it in the other direction, right? I did what you asked me, but it didn't work. Well, it's actually still going to work because that's what the mangling means. So we take what they typed in, and if there's any combination of last name and room number that matches what the property management system says, then we're going to let them on. So that means they could put either the last name or the room number first, doesn't matter. And they could use like any kind of capitalization that they want to, as long as the room number and the last name match, we're going to match it up to who that's supposed to be. And you're going to get on the network. So that's what DPSK mangling is.
But when you enter, so let's I like to use things as if it's my mom doing it. So when my mom would check into the hotel and they're like, oh, she goes, I want to connect to the Wi-Fi. And my mother, no, God love her or hate her because she raised me, your choice. But she's not very technically savvy. So when she opens up her phone to connect to the Wi-Fi, is it just going to ask her for the passphrase, or is it going to be like you'd see for like a EAP PEEP connection where you get, hey, what's your username and in one field and then your password in the next field? Or, what does the end users actually see on their device? Is it just, hey, enter in the passphrase, and as long as they get their last name and room number, then it works? Or what do they see? Is it just a single entry that they enter?
Yeah, it's just a single passphrase.
Okay.
And it's so the end user, like the barrier to entry for this for end users is as low as it could possibly be, right? Everyone knows how to connect to a network and type in a password. And every device that is allowed to put that Wi-Fi sticker on the box has that capability.
Okay.
So it means that like doesn't matter what the device is, you just connect to the network, put the password in. And the beauty of that also is there's no support for this required on the device side. So as long as the device supports a standard WPA2 pre-shared key network, you can join it.
Nice.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I would definitely say we need a better name than mangling, but it definitely
we'll talk to Marky about that.
It definitely gets your attention. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's probably why that name was chosen.
So we got one more question that we want to ask, and before we let you go here, and we've referenced it a couple times, and we'll have a link to your Mobility Field Day 9 presentation in the show notes. So if you haven't seen that, go find the link, click on it, and you can watch John get grilled by people that are much more knowledgeable than Deegan and I. But of all these different features that you'll see in this on your slide as you go through RWG, let's ask you, what is your favorite, or what's your most favorite feature, or the one thing that it solves that you're like this is something I've been waiting for and I love, and it really helps me and my customers out. I'm gonna ask you to pick one.
You really put me on the spot here, Jim. You're gonna make me pick one. That is so difficult. So I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna say it's the integrated policy infrastructure that is the core of how you configure RWG, because that really is the magic, right? I mean, the ability to have a policy that dictates everything that happens to that user's traffic and can be dynamically changed based on other stuff that happens, like a security scan that we kick off, or the fact that you tried to hit the management interface 200 times in 10 seconds or whatever, can dynamically change that policy into a different experience. So that's I'm going to go with that. It's the policy engine.
I did not expect you to say that, but that's a good answer. Nice. That is, yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Chris, you know what he did? Because you put him on the spot, and he had to came up with that one. It probably means we have to bring him back.
Yeah, we should probably do that.
John's like, great. What did I sign up for?
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. So, like I said, there's no way we can cover it all on this in this episode.
No, not unless we wanted to make like a 3-hour episode. And I really, as much as I do talk, I don't want to do for 3 hours. I don't think I have anything else. Jim, do you?
I have lots of questions, but as we just decided, we don't like
show.
Well, how many times are we going to use that joke? Seriously, no.
To infinity.
But no, I was going to say, since we just determined we don't want to do a 3-hour episode, I think for this introductory chunk, or this introductory conversation about RWG, I think I will table the rest of my questions that I have, and yeah, we'll have to talk to Mr. Murphy and see about bringing him on at another time, and maybe go through, instead of that high level, maybe pick one of the verticals or elements or focuses, and spend a little bit more time on that. But I think for now, I think he's given us a lot to think about and try to digest. So I'm good.
Cool. Well, John, before we send it out with the music, have any closing thoughts, final comments, anything you'd like to add?
No, I really don't. I mean, all I would say is, if you are interested in RWG, and you want to, do a POC, good chance I'll be the guy working with you on that, and look forward to doing it.
Nice. Yep. Definitely reach out to, if you're listening to this and you're interested, reach out to your SE or your account manager and get the process started for a nice little, POC, and we'll let you meet Mr. Murphy and get some autographs and, yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah, and I'll get some links put into the show notes. So hopefully we'll find a way that you could possibly even contact Ruckus Networks to get that started as well. So I'll see what I can dig out, because apparently I'm supposed to be doing something other than taking the requirements from the customers to the engineers. So I might as well figure out how you can contact the engineers. So I'll work on that, and hopefully we'll have something for you in the show notes.
Nice. Otherwise, we'll just email Middle.
Oh, we could do that too.
He loves that. Yeah,
Well,
or call his cell phone. He loves
did
that
give
too.
out his email address last time, so
Yeah.
Anyways, well, on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank everybody. Have a great rest of the day, your Thursday, and we will catch you guys on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy Thursday, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right, and I'm going to stop recording again.